Welcome back to the Story of Liberty. This is John Bona. Well, it's great to be here in Charleston, South Carolina. So much happened here. Of course, we know the Revolutionary War happened here in a very big way, and the Civil War. We'll cover both of those briefly.
On April 12th, 1861, the first shots were fired right here to begin the Civil War. As we stand here at the Battery, and Fort Sumter's on in the background. Join us on this brief tour of the Battery.
The Battery is a landmark defensive seawall and promenade in Charleston, South Carolina, famous for its stately homes. Named for the Civil War Coastal Defense Artillery Battery at the site. It stretches along the lower shores of the Charleston Peninsula, bordered by the Ashley and Cooper Rivers, which meet here to form the Charleston Harbor. In the 18th century, rocks and heavy materials were used to fortify the shore of the Cooper River on the eastern side of the peninsula. In 1838, this area of the Battery, known as the High Battery, became a promenade. First used as a public park in 1837, the area became known as White Point Garden, and it became a place for artillery during the American Civil War.
You can see these beautiful southern mansions here that were here for over 100 years or longer, and just join us as we stroll down to Battery Park.
This 10-inch cannon was used in the battle of Fort Sumter in October of 1863. Just look at this. Look at the size of this, and imagine the ball that came out of here was at least a 10-pound ball that shot out of here. The Great Battle of the Civil War, 1863. This monument was done erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy in honor of those who fought to defend this city, Charleston, South Carolina, the Great War, we know as the Civil War of the United States. You know, once the whole state of Georgia was under the control of the British, Sir Henry Clinton, he determined to make a gradual conquest of the entire South. And after that, he would go north. But in the spring of 1780, he was encouraged because several thousand loyalists, they were called Tories, throughout the South, they rallied to the British flag. This gave Clinton the encouragement that he was looking for to launch his campaign. And guess where the first target was? Yes, right here in Charleston, where at Fort Moultrie they had held off the British during the June of 1776 battle, but this time it fell. Charleston was captured, and 5,500 prisoners were taken. This defeat was one of the worst in U.S. history. It was during this campaign, however, that the British Tories began to develop a reputation for the atrocities to prisoners. You probably have seen this in the movie The Patriot. Colonel Tarleton was the worst of these. He would head up a column of cavalry. He would corner them, these patriots, during battle. And even if they had white flags flying and their arms were put on the ground, he would use both sword and bayonet to slaughter them. These atrocities against the American prisoners just rallied the troops. At this point, the entire British campaign in the South came under General Cornwallis. This led George Washington to recommend to Congress that the Americans have an overall commander as well. Well, Congress ultimately picked Gates. But Gates would lose the next battle and give the British their first victory at Camden, South Carolina. You know, he actually made the mistake of feeding his army a breakfast of meal mush with molasses, and it gave many of the American troops diarrhea. So as we see, a lot happened in Charleston, South Carolina. You know, before the Civil War, the next big war in America, there was no income tax. Did you know that? Nearly 90% of the federal government's revenue came from tariffs on imports, and mostly collected from the southern ports like Charleston, South Carolina, right here on this body of water. Tariffs made foreign goods more expensive. They cost more. Now this resulted in people buying more goods produced in the northern factory, right? Because if there was no tax on it, it would cost less. So people started buying and producing more goods in the northern factories. Okay, these taxes on imports helped the North, but it hurt the South. And the South had no factories to protect its own. Their economy was agriculture. It was cotton and rice, and they relied, frankly, heavily on slave labor. Well, just a few months after President Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated president, South Carolina, Charleston, they threatened to stop collecting taxes, these tariffs. Their economy was experiencing a recession, and basically they decided not to collect tariffs anymore. Well, Abraham Lincoln didn't respond to that too well. He sent troops and they occupied Fort Sumter in Charleston's harbor. Well, that provoked the Confederates, and especially their General Beauregard. He decided to fire upon that fort. Remember that? That was April 12th in 1861. And folks, that was the shot that began the Civil War. The Confederate Army in the beginning was unstoppable. They won battles at Bull Run, Virginia, just 20 miles from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And they forced the Union troops to flee to the fortifications they had built at the U.S. Capitol. Well, eventually the tide would turn the other way, as we know. The Battle of Gettysburg turned the war in favor of the North. Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So we see this battle, this Civil War, this very difficult time in our country. Whatever side you're on, you could see there were wrongs and rights on both sides. Of course, slavery was definitely wrong and unbiblical. And we could see that the federal government from the North creating these tariffs on imports that were collected in the southern ports like Charleston was wrong as well. So we all fall short, North or South. And certainly, let me say again, that the slave trade was terribly wrong, and it hurt this nation. And the greatest thing that Abraham Lincoln did was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Of course, this ultimately would end slavery in America. Thank God. Free at last.